There we go.
This turned into this.
We are going to call the superintendent search planning meeting to order. Today is Monday, May 23rd. If everybody can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we begin this evening, we have an opportunity for comments from the audience. I know that you guys who wanted to speak filled out a green card, and Mr. Cook has those. He'll call you up to the podium. Mrs. Murphy has the timer. It's 3 minutes. And has everybody have their card turned in? Okay.
Okay, Sarah Munch.
Good evening, everyone. This is going to be super fast. My comment really is about, the order of the agenda. Having public comment in the beginning is really hard because I'd like to maybe react to what the content of the meeting is about. So that's really all I'm here to say. So I know we're going to do a great job in recruiting our next superintendent, and I look forward to seeing how this all progresses. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know I'm not supposed to speak back. I just wanted to make a comment that at the last meeting, this was referred to governance and policy, that conversation. So, next.
Dan Peck.
Good evening. My name's Dan Peck. I've got 3 daughters in Novi Woods, the oldest of which is here with me this evening. I'm going to be brief too. First, I'm really excited to have a meeting where we get to have the superintendent search be our focus. I've been waiting for this. So on the ordering of the agenda, same, just tonight the way it works out. I've reviewed the packet ahead of time, but I don't know where this other firm came from or if we're making decisions or anything to be able to comment effectively. I hope there might be time to comment later. I know at the last meeting, Trustee Smith spoke at length on how great the interaction was at the last governance meeting. And I'd ask, I guess, both the board and the audience tonight if we can try to facilitate the same kind of session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jason Mitchell.
Good evening, board. Jason Mitchell, Novi resident. So my comments are for the board, but also for John Silver. So my question is pertaining to the posting. I think when originally MLS came to the board and presented what they were going to do for us, and then the Dr. I do not recall her name, unfortunately. Dr. Hagel spoke to us. They said that they were going to take all the parent comments, all the student comments, and teacher comments, and kind of categorize them so that you could kind of get a feel for what the community wanted. I did notice in some of the postings that it just seems like just a rote copy paste of all the community comments. While I do appreciate that does a really good job of helping me and the rest of the community see what everybody said and was thinking, I don't know if it was the appropriate way to go for a very professional posting for a superintendent. I would have thought that we would have had those categories that kind of stated what the community in general thought, and then if you wanted to have the actual verbatim from those sessions, to have that as a separate document that the candidates could look up or be given when they apply. But it didn't come across as the cleanest or the way that I would have wanted our school district to be represented. I noticed it's also inconsistent across site to site on the National Alliance of Black School Educators. It's just kind of listed all the bullet points right from the whiteboard. On the MLS site, it's a little more well formatted, but still the same bullet points with typos and spelling errors probably from the sessions. On the ALIAS, the Association of Latino Superintendents and Administrators, that one's very clean, and it looks like kind of the summary I was thinking of, so I don't know if they took it upon themselves to kind of make it a little more manageable and presentable, or if that's something that MLI kind of went back and cleaned up. But I would it would be nice if they were all very uniform and just a little more brief. And then I like having the actual data there, but that I think should be separate and not in the main body. That said, I'm really looking forward to the superintendent search. I really think this is critical. I really hope the entire board invests a lot of time and energy into this and really thinks critically about what would be the best for the school district going forward. I think we're at an inflection point, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes and very much involved and help in any way I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Any other comments from audience members right now? Public comment? Okay, seeing none, I am just gonna turn this over to John to lead the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. So it's important that we get together like this, just to, we haven't had the chance yet to sit down together and to walk through the process step by step, including the timeline, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page. You have a very clear picture of exactly what this is gonna look like and what your role is going to be and what to expect. To tweak this in any way that we may need to. Before we really dive in, because within a couple of weeks, the posting is gonna be up. And after what's been a relatively quiet time for you, it's not gonna be very quiet suddenly. We're gonna get very, very busy. So we'll get together at this point, make sure we're on the same page, and be ready for action when the time comes. All right, so regarding the agenda, we're gonna start with timeline and search activities and go through that timeline step by step. I'm gonna forewarn you that that agenda item in and of itself is gonna take up the bulk of our meeting time. I tell you that because if I didn't say that, once you saw how long agenda item number 5 took, you'd be scared to think that the rest of the agenda was gonna go that long too. It will not. We'll get through the rest of it fairly quickly, including talking about an option that's available to you to do an assessment regarding candidates' personality and behavior. Brief discussion about possible candidate recommendations to make sure we're clear again on points of contact and mode of communication. Talk just a little bit briefly about expectations, roles, and responsibilities, and then just any last questions that you may have. Okay? So let's start with kind of the meat and potatoes of this, which is the search timeline. If you would go to that in your packet, and we're gonna walk through that. So several of those first steps have already been completed, taking us right to really the very next thing that's going to happen is the deadline for applications is going to hit, which is going to be on Monday, June 6th. So I'm watching the site now. It's been open now since we posted this initially back on April 22nd. So I've been monitoring that, looking at the applications that have come in, seeing if there's any questions there. It gives me the opportunity to follow up and contact applicants if need be. Gives me the opportunity to begin kind of checking them out informally as well, to see what I might be able to learn about them. And I've also been able to use this time to begin to reach out to people that I think would be a good fit potentially for you. Candidates that you might find to be of high quality and that you might be interested in learning more about, and beginning to have dialogue with some of those folks as well. So that action is already taking place behind the scenes. So once that's completed, that application deadline is going to hit on Monday, June 6th, and then we're scheduled to meet on Thursday, June 9th. So before I forget to do this, one of the things we have to do is make sure that where we don't have those things, that we have times set for these meetings as well. So I don't know if you're looking at a 6 o'clock start time like we're doing tonight, or what your pleasure might be for that meeting.
Sheila knows what it's been posted.
Yeah.
June 9th is our career prep graduation, so the meeting will be starting a half hour later. It will be starting at 7:30.
Thank you. So 7:30 on June 9th.
So is that a special meeting, or is that a regular board meeting?
It's a regular board meeting.
We
So I thought-
typically start after.
Yeah, that's what I thought, okay.
A half hour after that.
But we'll still, as part of that regular meeting, go through this.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I thought that meeting was not public because,
We'll talk about that. In fact,
Oh, thank you.
you're partially right. The most significant part of that meeting and the part that's likely to take the longest is going to be in closed session. It's the one time in the search process that we can go to closed session. It's because when candidates submit their applications, 99% of the time, there's a box they can check if they would request confidentiality for their application. They check it per the Open Meetings Act. That gives us the opportunity to meet in private, where we'll be reviewing those applications. So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, really, that's just to protect their identity from their employer potentially
That's
knowing
exactly
that
right.
they're searching, because if they don't get into the second round, there's no really reason for somebody to know that.
That's exactly right.
Or the first one, excuse me.
Only the applicants who have been selected by you to interview, that immediately becomes public.
Right.
The identity of the others who apply should remain confidential.
But we should assume that that evening, this is a closed session.
Part of
A
it.
portion of it.
Well, you'll,
The
right.
majority of it will be.
The vast majority will be.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll talk a little bit more about the part that won't be too.
So I just wanted to make that clear, because I don't want the community to think because we've been in a lot of closed sessions lately, that we're not trying to be transparent through this process. It's really to protect the identity of the candidates. But once we come out of that session, once we've identified them and come out, we will identify them publicly. Is that correct?
Yes, although I'll specifically talk about what that's gonna look
Okay.
like.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll let you then, I won't jump ahead.
That's okay, that's quite all right. And it's important to know that this is routine. This is standard operating procedure. I don't care who's doing the search, what search firm, what board. When candidates request confidentiality, the review of the applicants is done in closed session. But again, it's the one and only time in the entire search that anything is done in closed session. Everything else is done in the public eye. Okay? So we will go to closed, and what I'll have prepared for you is I'll have a spreadsheet that will show you every single person that applied. It'll give some information about each of them, their work history, the degrees that they hold. And I'll have them grouped for you. This is the one time in the whole process that in any way, shape, or form I may be commenting at all about qualifications, et cetera. It's not designed to tell you who to select. And in fact, most boards don't kind of follow it exactly anyway, which is fine. But I'll have them broken into three categories. The top tier will be those who meet the qualifications and have the most relevant experience. The middle tier will be those who certainly meet the qualifications and have some relevant experience, maybe not quite as much as those in the top tier, but they're certainly qualified and you may have interest. And then a third tier of candidates who either are unqualified, I still want you to see that they applied, or there may be reasons that, in my opinion, you likely would not want to consider them over the candidates in groups A and B, the first two. Having said that, I'll tell you this now, I'm going to remind you that night. Again, I'm not suggesting that you follow that in any way, that you just pick candidates in the first tier, for example, and forget the rest. It's going to be totally your call, and I want you to make a thoughtful decision in that regard. And frankly, when I say you can pick anybody, even though there's three tiers, even though I'm going to tell you that I don't think you'd be interested in those in the third tier, you certainly have the option to pick anybody, including candidates there. I actually had one search where the field was so top-heavy that those first two tiers were filled with candidates that had superintendent and central office experience. The third tier had some principals and others who were qualified folks, but their experiences didn't match up. One of the board members had some interest in learning a little bit more about one of the principals. Ultimately, the entire board had interest in including that person in their field of candidates they were going to interview, along with the superintendents and assistant superintendents. And the end of that story is that third tier candidate is now finishing her third successful year as their superintendent.
Good.
Right, so it totally is going to be your call. So what I'll do is walk through that with you and share whatever it is I may know beyond what you see on paper about those candidates. And I'll briefly explain why it is I grouped them that way too. I'll give you the chance to ask any questions you might have. I will not have done formal reference checks yet. This goes back to them requesting confidentiality. If I were to start calling their references, I'm violating their confidentiality, so I can't do that. But I'll be doing kind of just rough background checks, internet searches, consulting with colleagues where I can do that confidentially, not acknowledging that they're applicants, but just learning about some of these folks in any way that I can. Honestly, it's likely that I'm going to know quite a few folks in this field anyway. They may have been applicants in other fields. they may have been colleagues, they may just be people that I have networked with over time, so chances are I likely will, but I'll come to the table and share as much else as I may know about them that you may not see on paper. You can ask questions, and then once we've gone through that entire spreadsheet, I will have given you a binder that's going to contain quite a bit of information, but one of the things that it'll have is the application materials for all of the candidates in those first two tiers. When I say application materials, that's going to be the completed application in the frontline system, the cover letter and resume for each of those candidates. So you'll have that available. Even as I'm going through the spreadsheet, if you wanted to start to take a quick look, you could do that. I don't include those application materials for the third tier candidates in your binders, but I bring one set with me. So even though I think it's unlikely that you'll have interest there, if any one of you says, I really would like to see a little bit more and understand a little more about that candidate, I would just ask Sheila to go ahead and make 7 copies, get those in your hands, and you'd have the opportunity to review those as well. So after that initial going through that spreadsheet, you'll have as much time as you need to then finish going through those application materials. To take as long as you might, and typically the advice is wait until the 7th board member, that whoever it is that is taking the longest, feels like they're ready. Ready meaning that you're ready to come out of closed session and speak to, of all of the candidates who applied, which are the ones that you would like personally to invite into interview. So when we go into open session, it's informational only. So what we can't get into in closed session is we can't get into any kind of deliberation. So you can't even get into starting to compare notes on who you might like, who you might not like, what you might like about this candidate or that. It's informational only. So my job, if you start to cross the line, is I'll politely tell you that that's what's happening and bring it back, keep you out of trouble. So informational only. You can ask questions for understanding, clarification, probe a little further, but that's all. So again, you're going to come out of that closed session thinking, all right, of all of these candidates, who do I have interest in interviewing individually? So when we go public, I'll have letter designations by each of those candidates. What I'm going to ask you to do publicly then, to be very transparent, one individual at a time, whatever order you choose, you'll simply say, these are the candidates that I'm interested in interviewing, and you'll name them by letter designation. So you might say, I'm interested in interviewing candidates A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. Each of you will do that. I'm going to tally what you're saying. When you're done, I'll simply read it back to you. 7 of you chose candidate A. 5 of you chose candidate C, etc. Right? So what'll be clear is where there's already consensus, where 4 or more of you have named the same candidates. It would then just take one of you to make a motion, single motion that includes those candidates by letter. Once it's seconded, the discussion could be, let's say one of you, you support a candidate that wasn't included in the motion, and you would like to lobby your colleagues to maybe reconsider, maybe that person had 3 of you in support, tantalizingly close, and you want to lobby to include that person too. You can do that. You just have to be really careful in what you say. You obviously can't name the person. You can't give their specific position. You have to somewhat speak in generalities. You can talk about the depth of their experience. You can talk about maybe if they have experience at various grade levels. You could talk about the fact that they have central office experience, that they have longevity in their positions, those types of things. That wouldn't kind of give away who they are. See if there's interest in adding that person by letter to the motion. But once that discussion is done, you'll vote on the motion. And once a successful motion has passed, I typically offer to do this. Board president could do this if you would prefer, but I'll go ahead aloud for people who are here, anybody who may be watching. I'll read those names out loud. Names and positions of the candidates, so that now is public information. I'll be having conversations with most of these folks in advance. Again, for those that just aren't even qualified, probably not. Anybody where there's any chance whatsoever, I think that you may have interest, I'll have at least one conversation with them in advance. I like to try to call them, even if I've talked to them already, kind of close to this meeting time. I want to know that they're still interested, nothing has happened to change their mind, that if you offer them the invitation to interview, they'll accept it. Last thing I want to do is have you go through this process, have me call them and say, never mind, I've changed my mind, or I've taken another position. So I'll do that. And so part of that too is to also forewarn them that if you select them to interview that night, their candidacy will immediately become public. So if there's anybody they feel like they need to let know ahead of time, they need to bear that in mind. Okay, any questions about that process? Just to skip ahead a little bit, so at the end of that meeting, there's gonna be a little more business to take care of, I'll talk about it. Even before I leave the site, I'll ask for some private space that I can get to. And I'll get on the phone and I'll call each of the candidates that you've just selected and give them the good news and get them onto the interview schedule, because those interviews are gonna be coming up quickly. All right?
Thank you.
All right, so we then go into preparing for first round interviews and making sure we're ready for that. Part of that is to identify interview questions. So I provided to you some sample questions that should be in your packet. What you have is a group that shows not only some questions, but a format that we typically use for those first round interviews. You see 7 categories. What typically happens is the board president makes the introductory remarks, asks some of the opening questions, and then with 6 categories remaining, I just, normally, unless you have a preference, randomly assign each of you a category, and you'll ask a few questions from each of those categories. There's too many here. What we normally do in a first round is, the first round interviews are 90 minutes, up to 90 minutes long. We normally ask anywhere from 21 to 24 questions, so each of you would be asking 3 to 4 questions. I'm giving these to you in advance because prior to our meeting on the 9th, if you will have had the chance to review these, get a sense of where you might have interest. When we're talking about these questions that night, we want to do them by category and number and not be reading questions aloud for obvious reasons. So if you're kind of prepared already, rather than springing these on you that night, I'll have another set in your binders for you, but I would ask now that you come prepared to have that discussion then too. We'll select the questions that night, 3 to 4 in each category, and then when you show up for the first round interviews, I'll have a small binder with 1 set of questions for each of the candidates, lots of room for notes. The questions you selected, the names of the individuals who are asking those questions by category, and I'll have that ready for you. And you'll use that every night of the interviews. Again, lots of room for notes. And that should, you will find that to be helpful when you want to reflect back later and start making some decisions. Question, yes.
Yeah, at what point if we have questions that aren't necessarily on that list, at what point do we have to have that discussion?
So here's what I would advise. That's a great question. If you go through these and you think, there's something else that I think it's important that we ask, I don't see it here. I would ask that you submit that to the board president for consideration.
By?
Pardon?
By when?
That meeting is on the 9th, I think I would say, and that's a Thursday.
By the 2nd?
2nd?
The week before?
I think that will give an opportunity for me to run that by John and to make sure that the questions have been properly vetted. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, the 2nd, if that's enough time for everybody.
Okay. And then if we have additional questions that have been submitted to consider, what I'd likely want to do is get those kind of printed and shared and, again, have them somewhere where we can refer to them without reading the question aloud and consider adding those too.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that. I was writing down June 2nd.
That's okay. What I want to avoid is having an open discussion and stating the question aloud, as we're talking about whether we should include it or not. So let's say Dr. Ruskin gets 3 to 4 questions submitted by you saying, I think here's one that I don't see here, but maybe we should ask. We can talk about what that should look like, but we should get those on paper, share them, and kind of have those on hand too with these questions as well, so that we can refer to them without reading them out loud. We can have those numbered as well, perhaps.
So just for clarity, on the 9th, the board here will do a review of the questions anonymously from the questions themselves, correct?
Prior to.
Prior to, okay. Because I know the reason, but can you share the rationale behind that, just so people in public and everybody knows why we would not be referring to the questions as they actually are?
Oh, I see.
I think that would be helpful for
Why
everybody to understand.
Why we're not reading the questions aloud at the meeting?
Correct.
And why we're not sharing them with the
They prepare-
anyone right now,
Right.
or ever.
Well, it's a public meeting, and what you want, hopefully, is that the candidates are gonna come into the interview, and the first time they're hearing the questions is gonna be when you ask those questions. Now, I will tell you that industrious candidates may well go out and they'll do their homework, and they'll research, and they'll watch other interviews that might still be out there in cyberspace, they'll do internet searches on questions you might typically hear, et cetera. So, you know, you expect, frankly, a strong candidate is going to be well prepared for this. But even having said that, that's fine. But what we don't want to do is just blurt out the questions in advance and kind of put them on a silver platter for the candidates.
Mrs. Hood?
Yeah, John, so, one of our community members mentioned it, but the listing that we have with our bullet points of this is what we're looking for. Did your team cross-check that to these questions, or how do we, who connects those? Is that our job to go to put together our thoughts of what we're looking for from the listing and the community and teacher feedback? And then we incorporate how they answer these questions, whether they're answering to what we're looking for in a candidate. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. We don't do that in the first round. We look at the first round as being more of a screener. Typically what will happen is you'll have candidates who may look great on paper. Once you go through 4, 5, 6 interviews, whatever the case might be, normally what happens, I have to speak to that, there's always atypical situations too. There will be some candidates that you just kind of quickly realize you don't have a lot of interest in going further with, and conversely, there are some that pique your interest you'd like to learn more about. So we don't worry quite as much about tying the first round questions to that profile.
Okay,
When we get to second round, we want to be more mindful of that.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Tom?
I'm sorry if I missed it, but, you know me, is the expectation that all 7 of us are here for all the first round interviews? Okay, and then they're scheduled between June 13th and June 15th. Do we know exactly when those time frames are, John?
Yeah, that's what we have to decide tonight too.
Oh, okay, because just from a,
Yep.
Yeah, wherever we don't have, that's again, part of this process, why we have to have this meeting, is we nail these down, and if we find there's any conflicts, now's the time to resolve them.
we should revisit that stipend thing.
It will get, I will tell you that the most intense week of this process will be the first round of interviews that week. That's a heavy week for you. It is, and so just be forewarned. That really is kind of the peak for you. It starts to,
But it's all evening.
yeah, it is.
Okay.
So if we can certainly talk about that now, so, and just to kind of finish that, so we'll have identified the questions, talk a little bit about what that first round's gonna look like. Again, just make sure you're fully prepared when you walk in the door for those first round interviews, and we'll be done. That typically, that can be, I've seen that meeting take anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 hours. Now, 4.5 was an outlier. I'm just telling you that, but I would say on average, I'm gonna guess quite often you'll hit about the 3-hour mark. But again, the part that takes that long, especially the longest, is when you go into closed session. It's a lot of dialogue to have, and again, it's you having the time to kind of painstakingly go through the application materials and feeling comfortable enough to come out of there with a recommendation. And we want you to take as much time as you need. Okay?
Got it.
All right, so first round interviews then, the following week, June 13th to 15th are the dates that we've designated. What we had talked about is, again, with each interview being up to 90 minutes, up to meaning, again, candidates sometimes get through the questions, sometimes it's a matter of style, sometimes it could be nervousness, but I've seen candidates finish what could be a 90-minute interview in as few as 45 minutes. I've also seen candidates who were having to kind of prod near the end and say, you're gonna need to pick up the pace or you're gonna run out of time. It just depends, right? But up to 90. So we normally recommend that you don't schedule any more than 2 per night, because wanting to, I would assume, schedule maybe a 10-minute break in between 2 to allow you to get up and stretch. You're now looking at 3 hours and 10 minutes, which is 2 interviews, potentially. That means 2 interviews per night. And again, I wanna go back just for a second. when you pick the candidates you want to interview, I won't be giving you a number to hit. I will tell you that typically it's 4 to 6. This interview schedule is going to accommodate, as it currently stands, up to 6 candidates. But I would never want to limit you. And for example, if you felt like there were 7 people you absolutely needed to talk to, and there wasn't enough to differentiate, kind of eliminating the 7th candidate, and that's what you needed to do, we'll make that work. As this stands now, June 13th, 14th, and 15th, presumably you could have 2 interviews each of those nights, up to 6. We would come back on the 16th, and that's when we would select finalists. We separate that because you would want some time, we presume, to deliberate on your own. You're going to get in these interviews too, any audience members who are present are going to have an opportunity to provide feedback.
How early would we start on those evenings?
So you tell me what works, knowing that it could take a little over 3 hours. You probably want to start as early as is reasonably possible, but it's up to you.
Those are my 3 work nights.
Oh.
Those are gonna be hard for me to shift all my clients from 3 nights to. So. But I need to know now if I need to juggle all that around. So you're saying like 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, what do you?
You know, again, to me, I think whatever the earliest time is that you can all accommodate, then you will not be getting out of here too terribly late. I can be flexible, so you tell me.
Is that a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Monday, Tuesday.
And then
We
it's
already
actually coming
have-
back on
And then
Thursday.
Thursday.
We already have it on like
Thursday we have a
Thursday.
board
Yep,
meeting.
I'm sorry.
Bobby, is 6 good for you, or would you prefer it later?
We can remind them.
7 to 10, 6.
I mean, 7 would be better. It at least would allow me, excuse me, to work until 6 or 6:30, and then I could just come straight here.
Absolutely fine with me.
Is that late for the rest of you in terms of that? I mean, it might be, Wednesday night's usually a little earlier night for me. So that night I might be able to start earlier, but Monday and Tuesday are typically later nights. Now, I will say, you know, it is summer. I might have cancellations, so I could start talking to my clients now. Do we need to finalize this tonight?
7 to 10 is fine with me, I don't care.
Is it?
Yeah, that's fine with me too.
And that's what we'll be on here Thursday, 7, so just block that whole week out, 7 to 10.
Okay.
Just like that. Tom,
Okay, well-
remember when you were appointed, they interviewed 26 people, so I think Bobby spent a lot of time at this table that night.
Yeah, true.
Nobody
Okay,
interviewed.
is that, Sorry, is everybody good with that? 7 to 10?
Well,
Okay.
wouldn't it be like 10-10?
Well, yeah, it might be 10.
Yes.
I thought about that.
Although it could happen though, what I do is so I would tell the first candidate each night that they should be here, obviously a little bit early, but ready to start the interview at 7. I'll tell the second candidate, so I would give them an approximation. Technically, I guess 90 minutes plus 10-minute break, they would start at 8:40. But I let them know that if the first candidate goes more quickly, you would appreciate, I'm quite sure, the opportunity to take a small break and then get started with the second one. So I asked the second candidate each night to be here quite a bit earlier and to be ready when they're here so that if you're ready for them, we can go ahead and keep going. So it could be you get out a little bit earlier too.
Can we on that 3rd night, which is Wednesday, because Bobby said she does usually do an hour earlier to allow for in case we have more than, because we haven't really narrowed down how many candidates we're gonna be interviewed. I know
Right.
what the actual average is, but I wouldn't wanna say like, we have 7 to 10 and we only have 3 days and we have 7 or 8 candidates to interview. So I think that kind of pigeonholes us a little bit.
So look at 7 o'clock on the 13th and 14th and 6 o'clock
Is
on the
that okay?
15th.
Okay.
Yeah, that should work.
Okay. And then there's a 5 o'clock time here too, that came up at some point, but I'm not sure that works for you. On the 16th, did I hear that you've got a regular meeting that night?
Yes.
We do. I think that is why, how long does the finalist selected meeting? That's why 5 was chosen, I think, because our meetings usually start at 7.
So the marching orders you're gonna get from me going into that meeting will be, after conducting now all of the first round interviews, to take your time to go back and review the application materials one more time. The candidates are almost certain to give you additional materials to consider of some sort. So to have time to take a look at those too. And you want time to consider any feedback that you're gonna get from audience. Yeah. And that's why it's especially important that you don't even think about trying to make a decision on that last night of interviews. You just will not have had adequate time to consider what you just heard, additional materials you got, and all the feedback that you may be getting. So it's better that you walk away, come back the next night. But I'll be asking you to come in prepared, again, similar format to before, go around the table, each of you individually, now by name obviously, but to say, here are the candidates I would like to advance as finalists, and to whatever extent you're comfortable doing so, it's your call, speaking to why. The rule of thumb is that we never speak about why we don't want to advance candidates. We don't want to disparage anybody publicly, so we never go down that path ever, right? But what you can say is, here are, let's assume it's two. Here are the two people I'd like to advance by name, and here are some of the reasons I'm interested in learning more about these candidates, because that's all you're doing. You're not picking your next superintendent yet. You're saying, I have interest in learning more about these folks, right? Again, in terms of number, the ideal number is 2. Does it have to be 2? It does not have to be 2. I've had boards, not often, but sometimes come back with just 1. It's a little bit risky because you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and when you then do take additional steps and learn more about the candidate, if you're deciding that you're not loving what you're hearing, then you're kind of left holding the bag, and we have to talk about where do we go from there. I've had boards pick 3, and it just means it's a little bit of additional time investment. You're going to have to be here that much longer to consider the 3rd candidate, and it's that much more to consider. It also makes it a little bit more tricky when it comes down to the final decision time, because it increases the possibility that it'll be a split decision and no consensus. When there's 2 candidates, you're much more likely to get at least 4 of you saying, here's our person. But it all depends on you. What I don't want you to do is use an arbitrary number to decide. So again, if in your mind, so as each of you names that, somebody may say, I'm just interested in 1. Somebody else may say, I'm interested in 3. You're all just going to kind of speak your mind. I'll tally it up and tell you where you are. If it happens that 3 candidates have 4 or more board members interested, so be it. And we go forward with that.
Should we meet at 6:30 then on that Thursday to do this prior to kicking off or give us more time on that Thursday or not?
I was thinking actually, the other, because we have a board meeting,
Yeah, I know.
so, and
But he said 5 o'clock on this, so.
But
I
that's-
know, I was thinking like,
You can make that anything you need it to be.
I guess it depends on if we want to incorporate it into the board meeting or have it kind of like a meeting.
Standalone.
A
Yeah, that's why I
standalone.
asked if we should plan on coming earlier that day.
Right, I think that if we are planning on coming earlier and kind of have it as a standalone, because there's other things on the agenda for the board meeting, then maybe even 4 o'clock, because then it gives us a chance to,
But the board meeting's not till 7. Right?
yeah.
And we have a curriculum committee meeting at 5, but I can change that. If,
Well, that's-
So
I
let me go
mean,
back, because it may help
yeah,
your
that's
decision.
tough,
You asked
yes.
about time.
Right,
So that process in and of itself doesn't take terribly long.
oh, it does.
We want to
Okay,
have a
I'm
little
sorry,
bit
it
more
was-
discussion then about second round interview questions. And so, there's more dialogue to have.
God bless you.
The ballpark hour, normally that Thursday night meeting is not terribly long.
Oh,
So
okay.
6?
That's
I
what,
was,
like
I'm
6 to
sorry, I was
7.
getting the impression it took hours.
All new to me?
Not typically.
Okay, so,
6 o'clock for that one? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think
You tell me.
that
Yeah.
works, and then if we're just a few minutes late coming in here, people would.
well, we're already gonna be in here, so we would just,
It'll keep us on task for
yep,
the
yeah,
6
that's
o'clock
fine.
meeting.
Yep, 6 o'clock.
Okay. All right, so with me so far, any questions as we're going through kind of step by step? You're clear on what that's gonna look like on that Thursday night? Okay, again, at the end of that meeting, I will call all of the candidates that you interviewed. I'll break the bad news to those who are not advancing, share the good news with the others, and get them onto the schedule for second round interviews that night. and they'll know that.
And then the second round interviews are
June
when?
20th and 21st. Now, these are relatively short days, evenings for you, long days for the candidates. I'll be here with the candidates too, but, so what I normally ask is, if you're okay with it, that you start those interviews at 7 o'clock each night. And I'll explain why. The candidates are here much earlier on each of those days, and you're having those interviews separately. Those interviews for the candidates typically take about 80 minutes maximum. For the second round, we normally have them start with a presentation on a topic of your choice. So one of the things that we'll be talking about on Thursday, June 16th, after you choose finalists is, and we can do that openly, because I'll need to tell the candidates to prepare what's the presentation topic that you'd like to roll with. So you can start thinking about that in advance. But for about roughly a 20-minute presentation, it's an opportunity to accomplish two things. One, you get to see the person's presentation style, which is important for your next leader. But it's also a chance to hear them speak in far more depth about a topic of interest, much more than they can do in response to an interview question. So it's a good chance to get a deeper dive into a topic of a particular interest that you may have. So on the 16th, we'll pick that topic. When they come back for the interview then, you would start at 7 o'clock. They would begin with the presentation, and then you would go with interview questions that could take up to 60 minutes. We won't ask quite as many on the second night. So I advise the candidates that they should plan on the presentation being roughly 20 minutes, which would leave them roughly 60 for interview questions. I have a timer. I mean, I'm timing these things, and I'm kind of giving the board president a heads up if we're running long, and I would ask you to kind of let the candidate know. We are running a bit long, you may have to pick this up a little bit. But I don't cut them off, I don't time the presentation. I don't say after 20 minutes, okay, you're done. I tell them it's 80 minutes, I give them the rough breakdown, and just let them know. If you decide to take longer for the presentation, you just know you're gonna have to be much more succinct in your responses to interview questions. If you take less than 20 minutes, you're gonna have that much more time to answer interview questions. So we let them exercise their judgment, but it's a hard stop after 80 minutes.
Can you speak to the stakeholder piece?
Yes.
How that's gonna look and what their days,
Absolutely.
the candidate day is gonna look like? And is it the same stakeholder groups that met with Dr. Hagel, or?
Well, I would presume you're gonna want something similar, at least, right? I would end up letting you call the shots. What I could do, I would ask you if this is okay, is maybe get with Sheila and rough out a schedule for that, and then share that with you, and give you a chance to respond if you feel like have not included a group that you think we need to, or whatever the case might be. But I would think what we'd start with is modeling it after what we did when Dr. Hagel was here with those various stakeholder groups, and do something similar. And what it would mean though is, so, and just like with that, we try not to cap the number of participants. So if it's a meeting for secondary staff members, anybody who wants to come can be there. If it's a meeting for parents and community members, anybody who'd like to participate can be there, right? So I'm there to do a brief, and usually it's about an hour. I'm there to do a brief introduction, let people know kind of what we're doing and why. Let the candidate give a brief introduction to the folks who were there, and then the rest of it is question and answer, so the people there can ask questions of the candidates. I forewarned them that the only questions they can't ask are personal questions. They can't ask about age, religion, whatever it might be, but pretty much anything else goes. If anything came up that I thought might be a little bit out of bounds, I'm there to jump in and put the brakes on, but I almost never have to do that, honestly. Yes?
I hate to ask another scheduling question.
It's okay.
Is there any way we could do the 21st and 22nd that week? Does that push us?
I can tell you if I can look.
You'll be
I'm not here.
gone
Yeah,
the whole week?
22nd, 20 through the 28th, I'm out.
We have a board meeting on that Thursday,
Yeah,
right?
I won't be here.
Okay,
It's a work session.
okay,
We're stuck.
okay.
We could, if it would help you, and if
Push it
your
a little
colleagues are
later.
willing, if it would help to start, since you won't be here terribly long those nights, maybe up to 80 minutes, that's it, one candidate. If you want to start a little bit later,
Oh. Yeah, that would work,
Like 7:30?
yeah. Then I could, yeah, I think I could.
that works for the
Does
rest
that
of you.
work for the rest of you?
I don't know, I don't have my calendar in front of me right now, so.
I mean, is it the kiss of death if one of us can't be here?
I think we all want to be
I
here.
think we all should be here at all times.
Yeah.
It's not the kiss of death, but,
I'm just asking, I don't know.
yeah.
We strongly advise to whatever extent possible. We'd rather alter the schedule if we have to, try to get everybody here if we can, yeah. It's
And you're
important.
saying it's like about 80 minutes?
At tops, 80 minutes maximum, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you'd be looking at what, 7:30 if you started that late to 8:50 at most?
Does that work? You're not sure?
Not sure, are we talking about,
Monday, the 20th and
20th and
20th?
21st.
yeah, so that's Monday is, 20th is Monday and 21st is Tuesday?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Both at 7:30?
If we want to say tentative for now, and if we find later we need to change that, it's far enough off, we could do that.
okay. Well, we can do that, and then if there's a conflict or something. Okay.
What I'll be doing, by the way, is I'll be updating this timeline with any changes that we've made, including just the times. And I'll be getting this back out to you. I'll share it with Sheila and George as well, so just know that. And then again, we're looking ahead, if we need to alter anything, obviously, we can.
Okay.
So again, during the course of the day, we typically will invite board members, tell you that it's probably best that you're not present for those, only because people want the opportunity to be totally forthcoming in their questions. I'm going to give you the example that I always use so that you don't take it personally, and I always tell boards that I do that too, so that you don't. Suppose one topic of discussion is maybe a question, how are you going to deal with our dysfunctional board? How are you going to get these people working together when obviously they can't do it on their own, right? If they were to want to go down that path or anything else that might be kind of sensitive, where your presence might make it hard for them to ask those questions, we invite you not to be. I don't feel like I'm in a position to tell you absolutely can't be, but I invite you not to be. So what I do with the people who are present is I have feedback forms in my hand, right? And what I'm doing is they're walking in the doors, I'm putting them in their hand. I'm a little more assertive about this. When we're here for interviews, we'll have a stack in your opening remarks, you'll call people's attention to it. Here I'm putting them in people's hands, I'm telling them why you're not present. And I'm telling them that their feedback is important, but their presence in those meetings doesn't do you any good unless they provide feedback, right? It doesn't, because otherwise it might be interesting for them, but without their feedback, you don't benefit from it, and you're the ones making this decision, right? So with that kind of introduction, I will just tell you that I probably collect 95% of the forms that I hand out back. Very rare person who doesn't give it back to me with their feedback on it. So you will be getting then that night. Normally we're able to, I'll hit Sheila up again. Before the interview, she'll be able to make 7 copies of the feedback forms, put them in your hands, and this one more piece of data that you're going to have in hand to be able to consider when you begin to make that final decision.
So those stakeholder groups happen earlier in the day?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can start whenever we need them to. We'll kind of build the schedule, see how inclusive we need to be, and then see when we need to start. I'll just tell you, like we did before, normally the group we start with and build around is staff members. So we look at elementary and secondary dismissal and schedule the staff member meetings so that they could come, have enough time to drive and get here pretty close to student dismissal. So we start there, and then we start adding the rest of the groups before and after to round out the schedule. And then we try to build in like at least an hour for the candidate to take a rest, get a bite to eat, and be ready to come back in front of you at 7:30.
Okay. I know that Mrs. Hood has something, but we also incorporated quite a few student groups. I know that we had talked through that, and then Dr. Hagel was here for the focus groups, and I know that that was a really important piece, so hopefully we can mirror that again. Because there was, I mean, it doesn't have to be long. I think certainly it would be great for the candidate to be able to visit the building, and we can work with the administration from each building to make that happen.
We can talk about that. I think the confines of the fact that you're going to have the candidate here on one day, and you're going to be limited by time just in terms of how much they can accomplish during the course of the day, take a break, come back with you. Mm-hmm. It'll be somewhat limiting, so we'll be as inclusive as we can be, but just kind of be forewarned that I'm gonna guess we may not be able to be quite as inclusive as we were when Dr. Hagel was here, although I won't say that for sure. If we can make that happen, I hear that that's important and we'll do our level best too.
Okay, it is. Thanks. Kathy?
I wonder if those are in this room?
Well, if they could be, I typically will take guidance from the district in terms of what you think will work best. I don't know what the maximum size of the groups that Dr. Hagel had, Jill, I'm not sure if you know, but do you think this?
They were very small. We had all of the chairs set up in here, and I want to say the biggest group was 10 people.
Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I would, it's the norm. It's, even in districts with a high level of stakeholder engagement, for whatever reason, when we do these meetings, and they are totally open, we don't get huge numbers of people at them. And normally a room like this would accommodate anybody who's interested, I'll just tell you. Hopefully this would be the exception, maybe it will be, but based on prior experience, even including that, likely not to be.
So I assumed if it was maybe set up as a committee meeting, it wouldn't be, we wouldn't live stream
No.
the thing, okay.
So what time would those stakeholder meetings start, and how far before we do the interviews?
That we would strive with you, them starting with you at 7:30, we would look to have them end those no later than 6:30, maybe even a little bit earlier than that if possible. If we want to pinch and keep that time down to an hour, I would ask Sheila maybe to see if she can provide something just for the candidate to, and myself to have here during that break, food, so that nobody would have to leave the site. We could just stay put, wouldn't have to have time to get out. And very honestly, I used to always just offer to take the candidates somewhere very local and quick to get a bite. Candidates are so nervous at that point and thinking about their time with you, and they just really have a hard
They don't
time.
want
They're
to.
watching the
Yeah,
clock,
yeah.
right? I honestly think we're better off staying put anyway. So I think as long as we build at least an hour in, so then we would start with those staff groups and we would build a schedule around that. How early it would need to start? I think the stakeholder meetings we had here before might have started late morning.
Yeah, the students were started at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock, okay.
Building. And then we had 2 parent groups, actually 2 staff groups.
Yeah.
One at 3:30, one at 4:30, and then we started our parent groups. Dan, you were here for one of them, I believe. It was 6 o'clock, 6:30.
Jockey between the two, I think it was, ended up at 6.
Yeah. Oh, that's true, yes. So 6 o'clock.
Yeah, so see, we would have to, but the latest we could start a parent and community meeting would be 5:30. So that we could end that by 6:30, give the candidate that hour break, and then start with you at 7:30.
Okay.
So it's hard to tell exactly, but as much time as we really need to be as inclusive as we need to be, we'll construct that schedule and make it work. And look, it's a long day for the candidate, but these are people who want to be your next superintendent. Every day's a long day when they're your superintendent, right? So.
And that would happen, the same thing, it would be duplicated for both days, right?
That's exactly right. What we try to do is throughout the whole process is have things be as equitable as possible for the two candidates. So we try to mirror everything right down to, frankly, when, for the presentation topic, I'll ask the candidates to, if they have a PowerPoint or some other visual medium that they want to utilize, I ask them to submit that to me at least by the day before the first presentation. But I ask, if it's two candidates, I give them both the same deadline so that one doesn't have more time to prepare that than the other. We try to make things about as equal as possible in that respect.
In that regard, and maybe a little bit off topic, but the question's the same as well. They'll receive the same.
In the first round, identical.
Okay.
Without exception. In the second round, we allow for a little bit of variance. So let's presume again you're down to 2 finalists. The only rule of thumb would be, if you have a question that's specific to one of the candidates, then we need to have a question that's specific to the other. So each of them gets a question specific to them. If you have 2 for one, you have to have 2 for the other. And then all the other questions are exactly the same, asked by the same person, same order. We ask that you don't kind of riff on the questions or editorialize, that you just, because it can change the meaning inadvertently. So just kind of stick to the script, read the question as is,
That's really important, because
It
the
is.
last time we went through that, there were some variances that occurred that then created kind of a, a moment.
You can.
So
Right.
it's good for us to just, it's a good reminder.
Yeah. So does that make sense on how you could potentially, with the finalists, have specific questions to them as long as you do the same for both?
Now, just a quick question, like if the person asking the question or someone else has, I'll say confusion, or wants clarification of something that the candidate says, how do you handle that?
They will ask sometimes. They rarely ask for an interpretation. Every once in a while, they will. And if...
No, us.
If the board has,
If
you
the board
have-
needs
wants
clarification.
clarification or follow-up on their response.
You know, we advise that you don't, again, only because what that can do two things. It can throw off the timing, and it could with one candidate too, take it off in a little bit of a different direction, that again, now you don't have apples to apples quite as much.
Okay,
So, and part of what you're assessing is if somebody doesn't, you think, really fully answer the question. If that happens once, I mean, it can happen, but if that's a pattern, that's one of the things that you're gonna consider when you're deciding who it is you're going to advance, frankly.
sure, okay, good point.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the things I advise the candidates too, I don't coach them specifically, but broadly, I just tell them that they wanna be very mindful and be attuned to the question being asked and strive to answer the question directly and thoroughly, and use examples where they can.
Okay,
So
I
if they fail to
appreciate
do
that.
that, that's fair game for you to make it that what you want.
Right, so our assessment of that might be a note,
That's
not clear enough.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah, and the reason I encourage you to take a lot of notes is you might think, oh, certainly I'll remember this, but if you've interviewed, for example, in the first round, 6 candidates over 3 nights, and now you're trying to remember who said what, that could also be a reminder to you of how you reacted in the moment, which is also something you could easily lose too. But same for second round, so then by the time you're done with all interviews, you'll still have your interview notes from your first round questions and second round questions for both of those candidates.
okay.
So long days for the candidates when we get down to finalists, but for you, we're looking at, again, 7:30 to roughly 8:50 or so. Then the last step for you before you make a decision would be site visits. We did designate a couple of dates for that. What the site visits are comprised of is up to 3 board members who would visit the work site of each of the candidates. One thing that makes this a little bit, I shouldn't say tricky, it's really not tricky, but it's gonna come after school's out. Students will be gone, right? That can work 2 ways in that it's easier in some ways for people to be present for these meetings because they're not in class in front of kids. The only thing you lose is that you're not gonna be able to walk into a building and get a sense of the kind of the climate and culture because you're not gonna see school in session. But other than that, what it's typically comprised of anyway is we ask the candidates in about a 4-hour block of time to arrange for various groups of key stakeholders in their district to be ready to meet with you, with those 3 board members, and to answer questions that you may have for them. We advise that it's the same 3 board members for consistency. So over the course of a couple of different days, a 4-hour block of time, I'll normally tell you, given the dates that we selected, you tell me which 4-hour block works for you. Normally we're looking at during work hours, but we can probably vary that a little bit. So we would ask the candidates to set that, arrange for groups. I give the candidates guidance in writing, and again, I tell them what you're gonna wanna see, those who are present, is you're gonna wanna see a broad representation of the constituents in their district, people they work with and for, et cetera, which could include, if it's not a superintendent, for example, you'd wanna talk to that person's superintendent. If it is or isn't, you might wanna talk to some board members, administrators, teachers, other staff members, parents, students. I give them these examples, and I even give an example, I tell them a lot of times it could be maybe 20 to 25 minutes with a 5-minute block in between, roughly. But I really want to give them some latitude to structure it and personalize it in some way. So I give them that kind of broad guidance. I share with you what I tell the board members, or tell the finalists. I send that to you as well so you can see exactly what I told them. because part of what you can assess is what did they do with that direction and how do they structure this? That's part of it too. I've had board members question the benefit, if it's the candidates picking the people that you're gonna talk to, because surely they're gonna pick people who are gonna say nice things about them, right? Why would you pick somebody who's gonna trash you to the 3 board members who comes? We probably wouldn't. But I will simply tell you that I repeatedly asked boards who have participated in site visits for their feedback, in part because honestly, if I didn't feel like it was really adding to the process, why do it? We'd look at doing something else. Consistently, the feedback has been they have found it to be extremely beneficial, and sometimes they found it to be a difference maker. Partly what I tell them, and a lot of times they'll come back and say they found it to be true. It's one thing, even if you're in a room like that, you're somebody who's been asked to be part of these stakeholder groups, and you presume, well, of course, this candidate's gonna want me to say nice things, and so I'll do that. How you say these nice things is a whole different ballgame. What your level of enthusiasm is, what your body language is, what your facial expression is, what the other people in the room are doing. If you're in a group of 6 or 7 people, and somebody in response to a question says something positive about a candidate, and on the one hand, you see other participants smiling and nodding and putting a hand up and kind of eager to jump in and add their own examples, that tells you something. If you're in another group and you hear a candidate dispassionately say something nice and others are looking down and doodling and not wanting any part of this discussion, that tells you something too, right? So again, I can just tell you that boards have said in many occasions, not only did they find it helpful, they often found it to be a difference maker for them. So.
I just received a text from one of our administrators who pointed out that June 20th and 21st, when we're talking about doing student stakeholder groups, our students will be gone. They'll be on vacation then.
Thank you for reminding me though, because I actually talked to your administrators about that. Maybe your administrator who's listening can chime in if this doesn't work either, but they had mentioned the possibility of summer school going on at that time. Would it be then? Do we know?
Yeah.
I do believe,
Actually, yes,
just beginning.
yeah, summer school starts a couple weeks after school gets out, so it could be in session. I know they take a break at the 4th of July weekend, so they have a couple of days off then, and it's only Monday through Thursday, summer
Okay.
school.
So part of that could be that we would utilize the opportunity to go where the students are and those that are present for summer school. But the other part of that, honestly, is that again, if we rely on the principals to extend an invitation, however they might do that to students, I'm guessing you're gonna have some students who are interested enough that they would come back for this. So one way or the other, I think the right approach typically, when we're talking about inviting students, is working with your administrators and utilizing their expertise and helping them help us make that decision about what's the best way to include students in this. So I would advise we do that, but I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a great point. We'll have to consider that.
And staff will be gone as well.
So it'd be the same with staff. We're gonna need to extend invitations, and this applies not only to the 20th and 21st, but the site visit. So in both cases, it's a little bit different in that way. You don't have a captive audience necessarily, but you're gonna have interested parties. I'm quite sure of that.
So the site visits, are you anticipating that'll be the board superintendent search committee?
Again, I think there's 7 of us, and we'll see who's available on
Okay.
those particular days and what the hours are. So I think we would start there, and then if someone on that committee isn't available, we would extend it out to.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. I was just
Yeah.
curious.
So the other part of the site visits, part of the reason we want the same 3 people if possible, is once those 3 people finish both site visits, we ask that you put together kind of a joint communication to the other 4 board members, that as much as you can make it is an objective summary of what you saw and heard. It is absolutely not a recommendation based on what you saw and heard. You don't want it.
Observations.
Yes, you try not to be subjective to whatever degree you can help it. One of the checks of that is, sometimes what I've seen happen is the group will task one of the 3 they'll have dialogue, but take the first crack at putting something in writing, and then we'll all kind of have at it. If there's anything that all 3 of you don't totally agree, yep, that's exactly how I saw it or heard it, don't include it. So anything that will be included are things that all 3 of you are saying, yes, that's what we saw, yes, that's what we heard.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. So that gets us to selection of the superintendent, which we've got is June 29th or 30th. We should pick one of those dates now and set the time now as well.
I don't know, I'll tell you.
I can do either.
I like the 30th.
How did we know you were gonna say that?
Well, I'm gonna be working a lot of Saturdays.
I can do
Yeah,
either
I'll
day.
have to work
But
Saturdays.
then we only have, what, 1 day of overlap between the current superintendent and new superintendent?
Well, based on this, you won't even have that,
You won't have
because all you're doing, let's say it's the 30th, you're selecting
Giving
the
them an
superintendent,
offer.
you
Yeah,
haven't
they have to
even settled the
negotiate the
contract
contract
yet.
and stuff, so.
That person hasn't given, there's no way, so you would have to have dialogue with Dr. Matthews to see, to what extent, and he's going to another responsibility too, but, whether he'd be willing to kind of come back and spend a day. I will tell you this from firsthand experience, and I say this to every board in every situation, it's not because of this situation. A lot of times boards will think you want to have a week or two of overlap at least, sometimes a month, you really need that in order to have a smooth transition. I've been involved in a couple of those transitions personally. After a day or two, you're trying to stay out of each other's way, honestly. I really think that would be, in terms of actually being in the district together, that's the only time you need. What I found to be most valuable in those situations is to know that I had the outgoing superintendent's phone number with the promise that if I run across something and I want to ask about the history of this, or I have a little bit of confusion, I want to have you help explain this to me, whatever, that I could phone you, we could have some conversation, and then I would be good. So I think as long as you can get that, you're gonna be just fine.
Okay. So be
What
So-
time?
phone a
So
friend.
what time on the 30th, you tell me?
How long?
This again, replication, each of you is gonna go around, be prepared to say, here's the person I'd like to name as our next superintendent, here's why. We'll see where there's consensus, somebody would make a motion. So it shouldn't take long. If you wanna make it celebratory, a lot of boards do, what I would tell you is after the board votes and you've selected your superintendent, if you wanna stop the meeting at that point and have the board president call the successful candidate, break the good news to them, put them on speakerphone so everybody can hear it, it's kind of a nice way to do it. So as long as just kind of going around, having everybody talk about who they'd like to name and why, and have the board president make that phone call, unless there's other business to attend to, that's really it, so not terribly long.
Sheila has a comment or question.
Oh, no, just a statement. I will not be here on the 30th, so, and usually I'm the one who opens the doors and locks the doors to let everybody, but just to let you know, I'm not gonna
Okay.
be here on the 30th.
Okay.
So the 29th it is?
Well, no, it's up to you, no, you guys.
We'll find somebody to unlock the doors and set us up. I don't think it's good as you though.
And lock up when you leave.
All right, so it won't take terribly long, but so again, what time would you like to start that one?
We could start at 6 if that's okay with I mean, it's kind of a regular Thursday, so either 6 or 7. Pleasure of the board.
Tom, what do you think?
Right.
He's already seen his summer calendar go.
Seven's
flames.
Position night.
Seven.
7 is fine on the
Okay.
30th.
Yeah,
So 7, not 6.
Yeah.
kind of regular board meeting time, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So 7 o'clock on the 30th. Okay, and then, if there's a call to be made after the meeting to the candidate who's not selected, I do the dirty work, but that's evolved a little bit too. What I've started to do when the meetings are streamed or when they can see them, is I do tell candidates, by the way, because this question probably will come up later if it doesn't come up now. If people can log in and see the interviews, what's to stop candidates who are not the first person interviewing to watch and get the questions in advance? Technically, nothing, right? Even in the old days where you wouldn't stream them, if I'm a candidate, I'm the third person interviewing, and I want to send somebody who I know to sit in the audience and take notes and give me the questions, I could do that, right? So I do, in writing, send something to the candidates when I prep them, and just let them know that we're expecting them to display ethical, professional behavior and not to be present, not to have anybody present for them, nor to be watching any of the interviews for any of the other candidates until it's all said and done. I haven't had reason to believe they violated that. Technically, could they? They could, but there's really not a way to stop that other than just to trust that they're gonna be professional. If you've got the right people in the field, they will be and they won't do that, right? So this night though, I invite them to watch, because then they can hear what you have to say. And what I tell them is, if you still want me to call after the meeting, that's fine, but if you're watching, you probably don't wanna hear from me right then. So what I invite them to do is follow up, and they're ready to have a conversation with me if they want to talk about the search, what they can improve. And I'll still have that discussion with them.
Okay.
The other thing I'll add is what you may want to do to expedite the process and shrink the time between the time you select the superintendent and come to contract agreement is to have a contract, a draft contract hammered out before the 30th. Even if you have to wait to kind of plug in the salary specifically and other benefits because you want to see the level of experience of the person you pick. But if you have everything else hammered out and you just have to fill in a few blanks, you can make that go faster. Because then typically the first step in the negotiation process is you provide a draft of that contract to the successful candidate, give them a chance to review it, have their attorney take a look at it, offer a counter proposal if they'd like to get into negotiation. But the sooner you're prepared to give them that draft, the sooner you're likely to come to agreement. And the sooner you come to agreement, then you'd have to come back together, formalize that, vote on that agreement, and formally hire your next superintendent. And that's the point where they would go ahead and give notice to their current district. So you're looking at very likely a few weeks after you make your decision on the 30th before you'd have your person on hand and in the district. Not ideal perhaps, but we're cranking this along just about as fast as we dare to.
Okay.
Without sacrificing quality.
Alrighty. Any other questions regarding that?
Yeah,
All right.
I think we got final questions on 10 here, so.
No, we're way up on 5, so, okay.
Yeah, no, is there any more questions on timeline? That's why I warned you that that particular agenda item takes such a long time. The rest won't. So the candidate personality and behavioral profile option, this actually, and I'll apologize to you, this was in the proposal that you received earlier on, but one of our folks in the MLI office mentioned it to me. This is brand new for us. It had never been one of our proposals before, and I neglected to mention it to you. This is a take it or leave it proposition on your part. So I included 4 PowerPoint slides that I had access to for you to take a look at. That gives you some explanation as to what this is. But it's a basic behavioral profile. The description that I have is it gets into personality types, looks at conscious and unconscious processes, lifelong and situational tendencies, preferences for behaviors. The cost for that, Hewlings and Associates is the firm that's doing that for us, would be $2,000, which would cover up to 4 candidates, $500 per additional candidate. This is not a moneymaker for MLI, that's just what it costs to have the company do it. It's an additional data point that if you found that it could be helpful, you could do it. You could also take a pass. This is totally up to you, but I certainly wanted to call it to your attention. And the PowerPoint slides that you have give you a little more detail. I'd be hard pressed to give you a ton more detail because we have not used it before. This is new, so I have not seen it in action, to be totally transparent.
And is this just used on, okay, it says right here, prior to the first round interviews.
Well, you could decide that. You could do it prior to the first round.
Do it prior to the second round.
Or you could do it with second round. When you start narrowing it down, it's up to you, but it would probably cost you a little bit more if you did it first round because you're likely to have more than 4 candidates. You could say first round, second round, or pass.
You're not familiar with the finished product? Like, is it like a Colby index, or?
I'm being totally honest with you. What you see on that last slide gives you just a slight indicator of what you might see. And let me, this advances.
Do you guys use these in your professions? Something like this?
No.
That's what we're looking at.
I do not. Is this similar to HumanX?
It's along those same lines.
It's a personality
I think
profile.
it's- Have you heard of
Personality
Colby?
and behavior predictor.
Colby, it's, are you, you know, analytic, are you
Right.
starter, fact finder, visionary, that type of thing?
It's a little more data if you think you might find it, in my opinion, where it could be especially helpful is when you get down to finalists, and if it's a really tough call, the more data you have, the better. But I'm not trying to sell it to you, honestly, if you feel that there's value, we can accommodate it. If you decide it's not necessary, that's okay.
John, do you have information about other boards that have used this?
For us, this is new. I don't know that they've done it with other boards or districts. If you wanna just punt on that decision and I can see if I can learn a little bit more and share it with you, I could do
I
that.
think it would be helpful to know, like,
Who else have they used it with?
who else have they used it with?
Okay.
And why did they decide it might be helpful, and kind of that kind of background information? I think that would be helpful to know.
What's the cost again for up to 4 people?
2,000?
So if we did it for the second round, it'd be 2,000. We did it for the first round, it could be 3,000, 3,500. depending on-
Yes, roughly, yeah. Okay, I'll dig a little bit more,
It
you
would be
know.
helpful to know if any other boards used it and they were a reference for this group and we could reach out to.
And we'd search under Hullings and Associates if we wanted more information on that?
Yes, yep. I'll follow up and get that back to you in a timely fashion. In fact, if I'm able to come up with any other information, I'll either just email you a summary of that, or I could either bring it to you on the night that you're reviewing applications. So you'll get it in a timely enough fashion that you can decide before you start to dive into first round interviews.
Okay.
All right, happy to do that. Candidate recommendations, this is just to put on your radar that I had told you that I've already reached out to some folks. I've had some people reach out to me on their own, and we've had some dialogue. But if you know of anybody out there, prospective candidates, that you feel like could be strong candidates for this position, and somebody that you would hope you might have the opportunity to speak to, put you in a little bit of an awkward situation as a decision maker if you're reaching out, but if you were to give me a name and contact information, I'll do that. I do find, very honestly, I think when it comes from the search consultant, that can be a little bit more persuasive too. So it's not something you have to do. I'm just inviting you that if you happen to know of somebody, and rather than get to the point where you're reviewing applications and thinking, oh darn, I don't see this person's name, I was hoping they had applied. Let's not leave it to chance. Why not have me reach out and make sure they're at least thinking about it. When I do this, by the way, and I even tell candidates this, I'm willing to do a gentle arm twist. I don't go too far. The gentle arm twist is, I'd like to twist far enough to get you to at least take a look at the posting and consider it. That's all. Just do that much. And then you can get back with me if you have any questions and talk further. If you do that and you decide this is not for me, I'll respect that, and that's the only conversation we're gonna have. I don't want to unduly twist somebody's arm and talk them into applying for a position that, where maybe it's gonna end up being a bad marriage because they only applied because I kind of badgered them into it. So
Sure.
I do wanna bring it to their attention, I do wanna get them thinking about it. But at that point, it's a big decision that a lot goes into. I'm glad to answer questions, but I leave it to them to make a decision as to what they need to do.
So just so we have dates here, if somebody comes up with something, when would you need to know that by?
ASAP, there's 2 weeks seriously, 2 weeks
13
from
days is
today
the
is the
posting
application
closing.
deadline.
June 6th.
Yeah,
Right now, I'm gonna pass those
I'm gonna
out.
pass these cards out,
I'll help.
just so you have my information handy. You could just shoot me either a text or an email. And again, if there's nobody, I'm not saying you have to do that, obviously, or if you have more than one person, by all means. But the sooner the better. I'd like to reach people while I still have time to think about it, not have to make a snap decision towards the end. All right?
John, is it uncommon or something that you wouldn't want to comment on about, because the posting's been out since May 9th, about the posting? Or no, we
Like
don't?
number of applicants, quality of applicants, no. No, but I'll tell you why. Even with 2 weeks to go, you might think, boy, we're getting close, and surely we have some idea of how to characterize this. Impossible. There have been searches seriously where with 5 days to go, I normally don't sweat these things because I have enough experience that I know it tends to, by the end, tends to shape up nicely, right? Almost always. There have been a couple where I can recall, we're getting down to 5-6 days to go. It's not looking great. I'm starting to get a little bit nervous. And then suddenly, applications come flooding in. A lot of times from people who I've talked to and said, I'm thinking about it, I'm still not sure, and then now here they come. So for me to characterize it earlier on, there's just no value in that, and it can be misleading one way or the other. I prefer not to.
Fair enough.
I would say this too, even in terms of number, that can be very misleading. It could be a lot of people applying, but the field could be weak. It could be a small number of applicants, but the field could be exceptionally strong, just depending on who's in it. So the number to me is not the key thing, it's the people who are in the field.
Sounds good.
Quantity.
Okay.
All right. Points of contact and mode of communication. Typically, I will be communicating directly with the board president and administrative assistant, and then asking the rest of you, I want to answer any questions or concerns you might have. Just to kind of be efficient with contact, I'd ask you to filter those through the board president. She'll get them to me. The rule of thumb for me, just like the relationship with the superintendent and board, if I'm sending information to one board member, I'm sending information to all board members, just know that, right? So even though I'd be communicating directly with the board president, any information that's going out, or even if a member has a question, comes through Dr. Ruskin, comes to me, we're not going to give the answer just to the one board member who has the question, you're all getting it. So all information, responses to questions, everything, you're all going to see that. All right, any questions or concerns about that? Expectations, roles, and responsibility for the board and for myself and for MLI. I have a simple expectation for the board, and that's to follow the process. We've been doing this for well over 20 years. We've successfully placed over 450 superintendents. We've had a high level of success. Are we perfect? I don't know who is. I would never claim that. But what we do is very well thought out. We have a ton of experience. We've gotten great feedback from the boards we've worked with, including very recently some of your neighbors. It works. It works well. Boards typically at the end will say, if they follow the process, the three things, remember, that we want to accomplish is we want to be inclusive, transparent, and thorough. So I'm hoping you're in a position to be able to say, we've checked all those boxes. What I also love to hear, and I just heard this again from a board on the last one I completed, they found the process for the board to be fairly easy to follow, but they found the decision to be difficult because they had some really quality candidates to choose from. I hope you're in that position as well, and we're going to work hard to make that happen. But that is the one thing, is just to have faith and trust the process. And if you do, I'm confident that it's going to lead to a positive result for you. For me, what you're going to get from me, I cannot promise you, and nobody could, and if they try, that they're not being honest with you. I can't promise you who's going to apply. I can't make promises about things I can't control. The things I can control is how hard I work on this, that I'm going to make myself readily available if you need to contact me, that I'll be very responsive if you have questions or need anything from me, that I'll be open-minded and flexible as need be as well, that I'm going to involve my colleagues throughout the state. We're going to work very hard. We are now, to try to make sure that we do all we can to make the candidate pool as strong as possible that applies. And then we're going to work very hard to make sure that we go through the process step by step, as thoroughly as possible, do everything that we said we were going to do, so that, again, when you get to the end of this, you're going to look back and think, well, we did exactly what he said we were going to do. So just know that that's what you get from us, and I take pride on having that personal connection and being readily available and accessible, and that I can control, and that's what you're going to get from me. Is there anything else that you can think of in terms of expectations for me that you want to share?
Do you have a question?
No, I had a general, are you on 10 now? Or are you still on 9?
Almost.
Okay.
If no other questions,
Well-
actually,
Well, I kind of have a question, just some clarification around that, because obviously you gave us your phone number, but you suggested we filter things through Danielle. So what's the situation where we would need to reach out to you directly?
well, for right now, I give that to you because I want you to reach out directly, and this is for the candidate recommendations. That, to me, that's an exception.
Okay,
Shoot that directly to me, partially because, you know, time is a factor.
yeah, okay.
So we'll eliminate the middleman, and we'll do that. Beyond that, it's helpful just to streamline the process in
Okay.
that way.
Okay, I just wanted to get.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Item 10.
Sure. You had mentioned earlier that you were involved in the Rockford, well, your organization was.
Our organization was.
Involved in Rockford, and I think a lot of us saw some of that with interest, and they spoke about a rubric that they used in their decision-making process. Is that something that is typical that you would recommend for us to have a rubric? We could certainly get a copy of theirs, right? What they used and
We
modify
could,
it.
and if you'd like me to, for you to consider, I could very easily do that. The thing that it's not technically a rubric, but what you're gonna continue to hear from me ad nauseum throughout the whole process is to keep coming back to the type of feedback you got from stakeholders in the candidate profile. So I think to a certain extent, that's kind of the filter, and you wanna be thinking who checks the most boxes, even though it's not quite that simple, honestly. A lot of it is when you think about fit, you know, you have to trust your gut as well, and, you know, who you can see being part of your district and providing the best type of leadership that's possible. But that normally is what we use. But I think I hear you asking if we could provide that example to see if you might find it helpful, and we certainly could. I'll reach out to my colleague who used it there, and we can provide that.
Well, I know you did was it a word cloud? Is that what it's called? I don't know.
Right.
It had like the more bolder things that people
Yes.
are looking for, even having that on a list so that we can match candidates up to it, which I think is kind of what you're talking about.
Well, on the word cloud stuff,
Well,
I
if
saw
you're
that.
gonna put a rubric together, the rubric is so
Should
that we can
reflect.
make sure that we use that feedback, then that was the feedback, right? That, those.
Correct. So what
things-
you're saying is the feedback, the rubric should be based on the focus groups and the feedback from the stakeholders that
Yeah.
spent time and put their feedback in.
So normally, that's simply what you'll hear me kind of coming back to repeatedly every step of the process is bringing yourself back to the candidate profile. I normally don't provide a formal rubric, but every once in a while, the board will say we would find that helpful, so.
They found it helpful. I was just asking, since your organization was involved.
Sure.
I was just curious to find out what you thought about that. Was it helpful for them?
I'll ask, I wasn't involved in the search directly, so I'll ask, I know my colleague, of course, who was, I'll ask him to give me some feedback on that, and if it's something they found helpful, he can easily provide me a copy of that. And then if I can give that to you, frankly, that's the type of thing that I could make available to you, and even on an individual basis, even if you personally, since you really are kind of each personally making decisions that lead to the collective decision, you'll have it available as a tool. You can make that available.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing is quite literally, each of us individually will decide on which candidates we want to interview. Then we'll decide after the first interview who we want to bring back for a second interview. And then we'll decide individually who we want to offer the position to. That's interesting.
Right.
Is that all anonymous?
No.
No,
Because we vote.
No, it's not anonymous.
None of it's anonymous. The only thing that's really anonymous is when you were, to a certain extent, when you identify the candidates by letter designation that you want to interview. When I read
No, I
the
understand
names
that
out
part,
loud,
yeah.
we won't attach a letter designation to a candidate. But other than that, no, you're naming people by name, and again, a part of that is sharing your rationale, so that people know why you're thinking the way you are. What we always hope happens is, again, that accomplishes the transparent piece that we talked about, right? You're being very forthcoming about what your thoughts are for your colleagues, for anybody else who's listening in. But what we hope is when consensus becomes apparent, that at that point, everybody gets on board. You will have already had the chance to publicly say, here's what I'm thinking. But when you know that the board is about to support a motion, because there's clearly majority support, that you show unity by supporting the motion. You don't have to. It's just something you may want to think about.
And the candidates, are they allowed to sit in here during that deliberation?
No, they're not. Although, if you're streaming it, again, where I tell the candidates you cannot be watching other interviews,
Right.
it's okay if they want to watch and see your deliberation.
That was brutal, you guys. Just sharing with you my feedback.
When you watched it?
No, when I sat there where Panita's sitting.
Oh.
Listen to you guys.
Oh, when you were appointed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Paul that got me
Are you
crying.
having a little
I'm
flashback?
having flashbacks, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Oh, I didn't see you, go ahead.
That's okay, that's okay.
Try in a good way.
I just had a quick question then, in terms of like kind of the expectations that goes back to 9, is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah, 'cause I-
Just so it sounds like what you're telling us is we shouldn't be talking to each other outside the meeting about any of this, kind of?
Well, about the process, of course, when
The process was fine, I think, about.
when you get down to decision-making, it's the same rule of thumb as when you're making all the decisions that you do.
Right.
Can individual board members have conversations with one another? Of course you can. But you just want to be careful that behind the scenes, you're not skirting the Open Meetings Act and really
Yeah.
kind of deliberating together and making those decisions. So you're very experienced in that, and this is no different than that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
thought
that's
it
all,
would be
that's all
good
it
to
is.
clarify what that expectation was. Thank you.
I have a question, based on the public comment earlier. Can you talk a little more about the posting? And, we heard the community members say that in different postings, national postings, it looks a little different. And was that something that you provide to them, or does that publication take what you provided and post their own postings? Yeah, massage it and.
We provide it to them. I find it actually interesting to hear that they're different in different postings. And so I want to follow up on
Okay.
that. I'm not quite sure why it would look different in different places. I've always believed that it's going to be uniformity.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you can look into that and just
Sure.
let us know so that we make sure.
Was it your committee that came up with what that posting would look like, or?
No, actually, Dr. Hagel takes all of the information from all the stakeholder meetings.
I'm assuming we all reviewed it. It was very, very lengthy, I thought.
It was, with the 3 different word clouds, I mean, because it was the 3 different stakeholder
I
categories.
think that, whatever, the ship's probably sailed, but I would have appreciated it being a little bit more concise.
Can I share this?
Yes, please.
I typically would have been the one who would have facilitated those meetings and then ultimately put the profile together. I take a little bit of a different approach, and I typically would have had it be more of a summary and had it be more concise.
I agree.
But I know that, and it's not a criticism of Dr. Hagel, she expressed to me that she felt in this case, there were so many, people were so eager to share their thoughts, and they felt it was so important that they were heard, that she felt like in this case, she needed to be far more inclusive and include a lot of the feedback that she got and have it be visible and have it be deliberately a little bit different than what we typically do. You're welcome to disagree with that and think that's not what I would have liked to have seen. I'm just sharing kind of her thought process behind that and let you know that typically it would have been more concise, but there was actually some thought given to why in this case it wasn't. That was her thinking.
I like the idea of potentially asking the Rockford folks and who facilitated that, the rubric, but utilizing, as Bobby pointed out, some of those really top consistent characteristics to put together a rubric that actually represents us here in Novi and what our stakeholders shared.
Might be a very helpful tool.
Okay, I'll follow up on that for you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? And certainly if audience members have any questions after sitting here and listening to all this, I know, Mr. Smith, I should make you do this because you are just like the hero on how you did the curriculum meeting and I was not, or the governance and policy meeting.
Sure.
I was not here, so if you want to facilitate, I would love to actually watch and learn from you.
Anyone want to make any comments? Dan? No,
No,
right here,
just-
buddy.
So, did I hear earlier that, the binders of all the application materials, which they'll get, and then go into closed session to read, and then come out and make recommendations? Because it just seems odd to me that everybody's got the questions now with weeks to review, versus, they gotta do that initial narrowing from, hopefully 50, 75, 100 candidates to the 6 to interview in one closed session where they sit next to each other and read.
So
Like, I'm more worried about them rushing to that decision than I am about there being some accidental improper open meetings discussion because everybody's got a binder to review ahead of time. Does that make
should I
sense?
respond to that?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I would love to have 50 to 75 applicants, I'll start with that. I just typically, so that you know, more lately especially, it's typically more been in the teens. I'm thrilled if it gets into the low 20s. It's just the nature of how things are working these days, and that's normally what we see, which again is why I say, though, the number's not as important as the quality. So there's that part. It's not quite as many as you might think it would be. The other part of it is that's why I categorize them, because it does make it more efficient, because then within that, by identifying candidates in that third tier, I think board members can quickly take a look and quickly come to the conclusion that they're likely really not very interested, which narrows the scope even further. And it gives them enough, and part of the reason I then go through and kind of highlight some things and talk about each candidate point by point is it expedites that process as well and helps them understand a little bit more about the candidates and be in a better position. Where I wouldn't dispute it is it's a lot of information to take in, and it's still, even with what I just described, and it's a big decision to make in a relatively short period of time, which is why, again, I'm not gonna be rushing anybody. When I said that meeting has taken up to 4.5 hours, if boards in that closed session need, X amount of, it doesn't matter. I want you folks to take as much time as you might need. It goes back to confidentiality, which is why we don't provide the information in advance. And even that information that night, I can tell you I didn't mention this, but the spreadsheet that I provide to you with all the candidates listed, and then all the applications that you're gonna have in your binder, before I leave that night, I'm taking the spreadsheets back, and I'm taking the application materials on all of the candidates that you don't interview back. So you'll walk out with the binders, which has additional information too, but it's only gonna be left with the application materials on the 4 to 5 to 6 candidates that you choose to interview.
And that's the 7:30, June 9th meeting?
Yes?
Do we have nothing else on our agenda for that meeting?
Well, I think we were gonna try to put the focus on that, but I can't promise that there is nothing else on the meeting. We could certainly, no, we cannot make it any earlier because of career prep.
Right, I do know
Yes.
that.
Yeah, there is not a lot on that agenda. I purposely kept it light. There will be the budget stuff. It will be up for information and discussion. We'll have our preliminary budget and then.
Because we have to approve that.
And then our final budget, and that'll be approved on the
16th,
whatever,
yes.
the one that's after that.
Yeah.
So as far as, and there's the summer tax levy. So those are the only 3 things that are on there right now.
And
Okay.
personnel report, probably.
Yeah, 2 things. One, I would say I would love to encourage you to move fast on that rubric. The listing was really disappointing. It was, while it was comprehensive, it showed no sense of prioritization of the kind of profile of a candidate that this board is looking for. And so I'd like to ask that you, however you want to do that you actually take the steps to do that, and that you share it widely with the community so that there is some consensus and accountability of this board to a profile that summarizes what you heard from students and community and parents, but there's a unifying profile that this board will be accountable to in terms of your search process and discussion. It's how lots of searches happen in most other places. And so while I appreciate Dr. Hagel's desire to be inclusive, I think it comes at a cost that will carry for this board. So however you want to do it, it's certainly my opinion and hope that you will take those steps before you review those candidate profiles. The second, similar to this, having sat in this meeting today, but for the last few months, there's been a lot of conversation with this board about broken trust, about whose voices get prioritized. There's been emotional need, a lot of emotion, a lot of desire that this community come together and unify in this moment. And I just want to ask of you that unifying position for the community starts by you, by the leadership that you all will provide and will model in the most important decision that you will make on behalf of our children.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Benita. I'm not calling you, John, do you want to comment? No? What do you got, bud?
I was just gonna say, I've been engaged with a lot of community members recently, the Frog Force, which is our robotics. A lot of the community, I think, isn't represented in a lot of these meetings. And it was clear to me that it was an open house, there was a discussion at Deerfield, there was a discussion at the middle school. I'm willing to say 70% of the Indian population was at those meetings. And if there's an opportunity, soon need to get out to the temples, or get out to where a lot of our community members who represent a large number of, I would say, the students represented in our excellent programs, our recognized programs, our test scores. There's a lot of folks who are doing a lot of work, and the parents are committed to the success of the education here in the district, the superintendent. This is number one focus. Why are they here? Because of the education system. And so I don't know if it's a requirement or opportunity to engage this community a little bit more, but I think they're a valuable asset, and I don't believe they're being represented. And that's in my conversation with my own community, that's in my conversations, and that's a question that we should all ask. How can we do a better job of getting their input in this process? So that's all I have to say, and I know we'll make the right decision because we're going to be here every step of the way. But I hope that we all can, at the end of the day, say we've added our input, and that superintendent can be supported by all of us. That's all I have to say.
What Juan is saying, I think, if I could add on, is there's a lot of expectation that parents will come to you, will come to these meetings, will come to these. The truth is, you and I both know, not a ton of parents come here, but there are lots of engaged parents in lots of other places. And so I would echo, I'm double dipping because there's not formal comments, but what I hear Juan saying that resonates for me is it's part of this board's responsibility to go to parents as well as finding parents, asking them to come here.
I don't know if it's possible, I know you guys have your committee, but Duane, I know there was an occasion where you coordinated, I think we did it by Zoom or phone call or something, but it was, your community, and I know Jason left, but he lives in the same subdivision, and I know, unfortunately, we weren't able to get a bus to go there, but it was a helpful conversation, and it was pretty well attended. So I don't know if that's an option. You guys can maybe talk about it or think about how yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I wanna get clarification, you mean for the stakeholder sessions?
I mean, in general.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
same 20 people.
Right, I just was,
Right.
because obviously we got tremendous feedback from the survey,
We did.
which I don't think we asked any questions about where people live or anything on that survey, but it seems like we got a really good feedback from that. Not that we want to do another survey after we have these stakeholder sessions, but
Well,
being
so-
mindful of that and knowing that,
Can I
yeah, please
share
do, because
this?
I don't want to.
Part of, there are time constraints that would make it difficult if the thought would be, when we're talking about the stakeholder meetings, to have people come in and meet with the candidates. I would never just flat out say no to anything. I find it hard to imagine, without extending the process, how we would add the step of having the candidate go out to groups. Where I could see really kind of making a push to be that much more inclusive is with how you go about getting feedback, and even how you publicize broadcasting the interviews themselves. Because the more people that view those, if you certainly could provide a link for those folks too, so you don't have to be present in the room for the interviews, but if you're watching these interviews online, so you could be watching from your home, it could be anybody from wherever, where you strongly encourage anybody and everybody, watch the interviews, take the time to go onto that link, provide your feedback. If you want to be consistent, for your sake too, so that all the feedback you're getting is kind of in the same format, what we've done on a couple occasions, the district has provided, even for those who are present, instead of giving them paper to fill out, they've given them a QR code that takes them to the same link. So everybody's providing feedback the same way. But then it's not restricted to just people in the room. That's open to anybody who's tuning in.
Yeah, I do like that idea. I think the other thing that, not to keep bringing up Rockford, but Rockford actually had the candidates go out to the schools. I mean, I don't know if that's like we have a school over on, whether we did one at the middle school and one at the high school.
Well, we can't because it's summer, so.
We
Yeah,
can't
the
use
kids
them.
won't be there.
I know the kids won't be there, but you could do the stakeholder meetings at one or the other, couldn't you?
If
I don't-
you'd
Oh,
have to, possibly, we'd have to work on a schedule. What you'd probably have to sacrifice is some time. You might not be able to give each of the groups the same,
Amount of time.
right? But, so, you would just have to build in travel time. Never say never. We could look at how we might try to accomplish that.
Okay.
Sometimes what districts will do and opt for is if they decide that they're not thrilled about a site visit, then they go to that option where they'll take the candidates out to the buildings. Or frankly, if school is in session, I probably would be suggesting to you that you might even pull both of those off, right? That you could take the candidates around to the buildings and you could bring stakeholders to them for question and answer sessions. I still think we'll accomplish that in part because we'll bring the candidates to summer school. That's where they can interact with the students, in part at least. But if, again, I want to be responsive to what you need from us. So if partly what you'd like us to accomplish is to see if we can take the stakeholder meetings on the road and see if we can put a schedule together that makes that work, we can take a look at that.
It's a real quick, one more time around. I know you didn't get a chance to share yet.
Yeah, no, I just, this was a comment that somebody had texted me. I know that the personality test is new. I know that it's not decided that it will be used, but the question was that can we confirm that the personality test is certified to not have a disparate impact on women and minority candidates? So maybe as we're considering that, if that can be something that gets answered.
I can ask that question too,
Okay.
certainly.
Dan, on one side. Sarah, or do you have to talk to?
But mine's just more about like, in lieu of being able to go out to different communities, are we able to think ahead in how to communicate and essentially market that these interviews are happening or these stakeholder meetings are happening with a little bit more lead time? So if we're not able to go out and find to the places where people are congregating naturally, but trying to intersect with them through some marketing or communications.
Okay.
Might help to maybe encourage some people to show up.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think John and I had asked a week or 10 days ago when the right timing was for the next communication, since the first several communications had come out and then there hadn't been any, and we had talked about that. I know that George Sipple is working with us to not only put it on the website, but what I'm hearing you say is being more aggressive with communication now that this timeline is really hashed out, and to give the information more proactively so people aren't, so they have time to plan and participate.
It would be great to really hear, like, we want you to come. We want you to have a say in who we are selecting. Please make yourself available. And really extend it like as an invitation for them to be a part of the decision making, because perhaps some people just don't feel like they belong in this discussion. And they do. So just a suggestion.
I do love the idea of the QR code though, because that's something you could blast all over social media and kind of thing to make sure that people have access to it. I don't know if blasting on social media, but how you would go about making sure that people could participate.
I'll just say this again, though, what gets tricky there too is, I know what came up with the survey is, the question of, well, who has access and can people from outside the community? So in regard to that, can people access a code and access a link and provide feedback even if they didn't watch the interviews?
Yeah.
Possible, sure. I don't know how likely it is. In my experience, we never have gotten an indication that that's happened.
Right.
The feedback tends to be such that you can tell you're part of it, right?
Right.
The feedback is designed for you. You're the ones who are going to be getting this, and it's to help inform your decision. So frankly, if you read any feedback and you have any indication that I'm not even sure this person watched the interview based on what I'm hearing, you can discount it. Right, so I'm just throwing that out there because the question could come up.
Right.
The only other thing I would say is what you have to be, I think, a little bit careful of, and I'm saying this from experience too, is, again, we want to accomplish being inclusive. I tend to agree that what's more important is to provide opportunities that are not limited, and whenever and wherever we provide them, we say that they're open to anybody, and we publicize them to the point where the word gets spread. If we try too hard to target and then try to hit specific groups, we can inadvertently, in an effort to be inclusionary, be exclusionary because we can't include all of them. And now if we've included this group, but we didn't include another group, well, why didn't you include us? So you just want to be careful, I think, and look at it from all aspects when we're doing this. And that's not to discount possibly going out, but I think to be as inclusive as you want to be, I think you're more likely to accomplish that by making sure that the communities that you're concerned about maybe not normally participating, is there a better way to communicate with them and get the word out and make sure that they access the opportunities that we do provide?
John, if you can, I'm sorry, I was just gonna follow up on that and if you can help me with that this week, and you and I and George can work together so we can get a communication out by the end of the week, now that we've really hammered out this timeline, I think it's a good opportunity to really invite, as I'm hearing, people to be, at least a part of the process and watching and at the, all of these opportunities.
Yes.
Well, and even
Danielle, the city of Novi puts out a newsletter. I don't know how often, but maybe we could ask them to, whatever our communication is, the timetables and whatever we communicate to our, school district, that we could ask them to put it out to that as well.
Like through eGauge or something like that?
They have it, I think it's the number 6 newsletter or something like that. You get it every couple of weeks, and it tells you about what's going on in the city.
Okay.
The Novi Chamber sends something out too, quite often.
So just bend over to make sure we're doing everything we can. Real quick, last couple follow-ups, Dan, I know.
Yeah, just separate point, and I guess kind of to MLI, I think the board has had a lot of good ideas on doing the rubric and going to visit wherever and everything with respect to doing our search. But we haven't done this in 12 years.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like half of the reason that we hire a search firm is to give us direction on what to do, not to do
Yes.
what we think is a good idea. And a couple of meetings I've come to, it's like, hey, we're gonna do this, and if you wanna post it elsewhere, you can, it's an extra thing, your call. And today, we've got this personality thing, if you want it, you can, your call. So what should we do? And is it an à la carte all the way through, where we got more choices to make, or is this the search?
Well, and what we just reviewed today, in terms of the kind of step by step, that is the search. That's what we do. But what we have an obligation to do, I think, is to come and make a recommendation that we conduct a search that includes all of these components, which we spelled out too in an initial proposal, fairly lengthy to the board, and we talked about the various steps included. But then we have an obligation, because every community is different, every board is different, to then hear what that specific board's needs are. And if we need them to tailor some things to try to, we try to be accommodating without undermining the whole process so that it's not recognizable. So the things that we've talked about are things that I think would add to and enhance, and that's fine if the board would find those things helpful here, and that's what I'm hearing. But I'm totally confident that in terms of kind of the fundamental basic steps that we include in the process, that those are the things, and they're still included here, that we use in all the searches that we do. They've led to great results.
And what I heard, Dan, was he's gonna do a little bit more research on this personality thing, and we'll do the same thing.
Yeah, that one's new
We don't
for
have to
us,
make
so.
that decision yet. No. Benita? Go ahead.
1 second. Thank you, Mr. Russell and Trustee Smith, for running.
Oh, sure. Benita, real quick.
Yeah, I wanted to just clarify, my comment about going out to community was not in, I think John's right, like doing it in the process of this search is not necessarily feasible given the tight time frame that we're working. It's really more a comment more broadly to the board about really being active about not waiting for people to come to you and not relying on the few parents that might be in your circle. Or that may be reaching out to you, because I think to Demon's point, there are lots of parents who don't think to call the board. Many immigrant parents don't even fully understand what the role of the school board is. And many of our parents may not even be voting because they are not citizens yet. And so I think being active and intentional is important. But I also want to come back on this survey. I think sending out a survey is actually useful, it is inclusive. But I would also ask you to consider putting a few steps in that process, because I've heard a lot of, as in my many times at this board meeting, I hear a lot of people with a lot of opinions who are not actually parents of students in our current schools. And at this point, more than ever, at least being intentional to try to hear what current parents need while you are a community school district and every member of our community is allowed to be a stakeholder. This is a decision that is vitally important to current parents. And our demographics have changed significantly. And so being mindful to be responsive to current parents is really important. So however you can incorporate that into your survey, because there was nothing like that in the survey response that I know did get questioned about who was answering it and where it came from.
Anything?
One thing I think that we could do is we have a small group of people that always come. If anybody is from a certain demographic or ethnicity that we're concerned about that's not coming, they need to get out in their group of people and gather more people that they know. You know what I mean? There's people here that have significant groups of friends that maybe they need to get here to come.
We do, I do, as far as Indian parents, I do all the time. But in
Well,
there is a
problem getting more
cultural
company.
barrier, there's a cultural difference in terms of.
What I'm saying though is you're saying we're having a problem getting some more Indian parents say, well, you probably know a lot of them.
I do.
You can get someone to come. If you can't get them to come, you're expecting the board to get them to come. Like,
We're saying that maybe there are other ways to reach out to them, because there are, to Punita's point, there are cultural barriers, there are sometimes language barriers, there's some, I don't want to say fear, but intimidation factor, right? They're not used to this process, they're not, so it's just other methods for getting that engagement.
Yeah, so you may have to discuss it to give them ideas then, because if you're saying there's
I think that's
intimidation,
what
they may
we're,
not
I think
know
that's
what
what
it
we're
is.
doing, right?
Okay.
I mean,
Hey, guys.
so-
Okay.
I got it. We need to be a little bit more intentional, and I'm fine working, and I'm sure the committee is fine trying to get input and taking that and incorporating that in our effort to.
And
The Asian American,
you know,
Japanese, Chinese.
the DEI committee is supposed to meet this week, so maybe that's
Perfect.
something we could kind of have some conversations around. Is our engagement.
I know it's possible. I was showing Kathy a picture. I was on a Troop 54 out of Novi. We had a hike and camp out this weekend, and it was a really, really diverse group of scouts in our troop. There was 3 or 4 Indian kids and an Asian young man, and we had a female, because now females can do scouts, and a couple of Caucasians. It was actually a pretty good snapshot of our community. So I know it's possible. It's possible. So we'll get there. Everyone feel heard? Okay.
So
Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Can I just ask Sheila?
Wait, Bobby doesn't.
Will you make a note, Sheila, for the DEI agenda? Great, you already did. Okay,
Awesome.
appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and everybody get their questions, all board members get their questions answered from John. If you have any additional questions, just please pass them along as quickly as possible. We'll get them to John, and then Sheila will be in touch in the next couple of days to make sure we get this timeline out, and then John and myself and you and George can work together to really get a really solid communication out to the community, encouraging them and inviting them to attend.
Can I, one more
Yes,
thing?
please.
Important for everybody to hear. And again, you heard me say, one of the things you want to accomplish is to be inclusive, and it's all very important. It's so important for you to consider the perspectives of all of your various stakeholders. it still comes down to, the 7 of you were elected to represent this community, and you're the ones that have to decide. So I think it bears repeating that it's not a popular vote, right? You're not gonna go through feedback and say, well, how many people tended to lean towards this or that candidate? Absolutely important that you do read any and all of the feedback that you get, that you consider their perspectives, you think about what is it they share. They may offer some insights that you would not have considered otherwise. Push comes to shove, much like many of the decisions you make, a lot of times you have information that others just don't. You still want to hear from them, but it comes down to you doing your due diligence, and then you have to bear that responsibility and make that decision. So in spite of all of it, we want to be inclusive. We want to know what folks think. We want to seriously consider that and take it into account as part of the decision-making process. But ultimately, you're each going to have to kind of follow your conscience and make the decision that you believe is best for this district in the end. I know you will.
Thank you, John, and thanks for being here tonight. I think that we're good for this evening. This was a good meeting. What time is it? 8:05, so.
Don't we have to have a move
Yes,
from
we're
the
gonna,
chair?
Mr. Cook made one. Do we have support?
Support.
All right. Recommendation by Mr. Cook, supported by Mrs. Roney. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Okay.